This is College Matters from the Chronicle.
This is an attempt by the administration to curtail the institutional autonomy of American higher education as a group and institutions in particular. And I think it is extremely dangerous, not just for the institutions, for the students they serve, and for the nation as a whole.
Last winter, after learning that the Trump administration planned to claw back billions of dollars in federal funds from the nation's research universities, something historic happened. Lawyers and policy wonks at one of the nation's most influential higher ed associations scrambled to file lawsuits to block that effort. This was a watershed moment for the American Council on Education, which has joined a couple of other big-name higher ed advocacy groups in suing the feds. In its more than 100-year history, the council has only once before been a plaintiff in a lawsuit, according to officials. This action, which is still ongoing, is for all the marbles, staving off devastating cuts that will halt research projects and cost jobs. But even if the courts block the Trump administration, is the long-standing relationship between the feds and higher ed forever broken? We'll talk about that today with Ted Mitchell, a former Undersecretary of Education in the Obama administration, who now leads ACE as its president. Ted Mitchell, welcome to College Matters.
Thanks, Jack. Great to be here.
So the last time I saw you was about a year ago in Washington at ACE's annual meeting, and this was not long after the council had joined a lawsuit against the federal government over cuts to research funding. And I remember that you walked out to the theme of Game of Thrones. Do you recall that? Did you have anything to do with that?
I do recall that, and I was surprised, but I thought, hey, I'm going to go with it. This works.
Okay, so that wasn't your call.
That
but
was
you,
not
you
my
ran
call.
with it. Okay.
No. Hey, by the way, we're trying to pick music for next week's meeting. So if you have any ideas, or if any of your listeners have any ideas, I'm all up for it.
Okay, I got to think on that. Toward the end of the pod, ask me again.
Okay. The bar scene in Star Wars is a little overused.
I'm thinking the Godfather theme.
There
but
we go.
Were you trying to send any kind of message, even comically, though?
I mean, seriously, I didn't know that it was going to happen, but it did fit. The Kennedy Center is much in the news, and that's where we had our show last year. And they have just an incredible team. And I think the team had read my remarks, or the draft of my remarks, and put that together, and they hit it out of the park.
Yeah, it was a bit of a pugilistic speech, as I recall, and I imagine you're still in that zone.
It was, and you and I have known each other for a while. Like I can't imagine that you think of me as pugilistic on a daily basis, but
you have your people do that for you, Ted, when they call. Yeah.
That's right. But it was really clear I needed to be straight up with our members and the people who were in the audience that we were under attack, and the attacks had really just begun. We had no idea what the year was going to hold, and I'm glad we didn't start off on a Pollyanna-ish note, but really said, I think one of the very first things I said is, we're under assault.
Yeah.
Make no mistake about it.
You still feeling that way?
I am.
Yeah. We'll dig into present tense, but just so our listeners know about ACE, but you're a major higher education association, represent about 1,600 universities, I think. And one of the things that ACE does is really tries to speak for higher education broadly, which is, of course, a nightmare because you got 4,000 colleges or some odd, and everybody's got an opinion. But when ACE sues the federal government, as you have, it's effectively all of higher education saying, we have a problem here. What do you see it as saying about higher ed's feelings about the Trump agenda broadly?
Yeah, it's a really good point. And as you point out, we're really the only association that represents everybody. So we've got 2-year, 4-year, public and private all under our wing, for-profits as well. So we take that responsibility seriously. So we don't take fly-by-night positions, and we work really hard to not take positions that advance one sector over another, but to bring people together. So when we do something like join a lawsuit or file an amicus brief, even when we write letters to Congress or to the administration, we try to do so with our eyes and our ears open to what the community wants us to do. Mm-hmm. In this case, it was very clear that even in those early days, we felt that what they were doing with research funding, in that case it was the arcane matter of indirect cost, we thought that foreshadowed an assault on the research enterprise, which is heart and soul of what makes American higher education so great and what helps us build America.
And we'll get into, as you call it, the arcane matter of indirect cost in a moment. But I think listeners could be forgiven for being a little confused, Ted. You're in, I think, plaintiff of 4 lawsuits, ACE is, that all have to do with various things the Trump administration is doing relative to research funding. You have filed amicus briefs in other cases, including one that people will know about, the Harvard University lawsuit over Trump administration's pressure tactics there. Let's talk a little bit about that one first, Ted, before we pivot, because I think it says something about the sort of larger philosophical debate that is happening between higher education and the Trump administration. In the Harvard case, the Trump administration has pushed Harvard to hire faculty and admit students to achieve some idea of viewpoint diversity. That's not really well explained what they mean by that, but I think it means more conservative faculty and students, if I had to guess. Shut down DEI programs. Harvard says this amounts to a violation of the First Amendment, and that it effectively would mean that the feds are trying to take control of a private university. So big stakes here. What I'm curious to hear you speak to, Ted, is whether you think the Trump administration in the Harvard case is violating the law, or violating norms, or violating both.
I think both. We joined the Harvard case because we do believe that there's a significant set of First Amendment issues involved. We also understand the assault to be a violation of other kinds of law. You and I can get into the weeds pretty fast, but the Administrative Procedures Act.
Okay, all right. I'm here so far.
Okay. The Administrative Procedures Act exists to sort of to create a process for the government in its effort to employ any regulation, uphold any law, that there are certain steps you got to go through for that to be legal.
Right, you got to follow a process.
Got to follow a process. And in none of these cases has the administration followed the process. Harvard never had a chance to make its case.
Right. So there's a process violation, but then there's a substantive question of, can the federal government start talking to universities about who you hire, the structure of departments, the percentage of international students on campus? Do you think this is any of the government's business? You've worked in government.
Yeah, it's thanks. So we've cleared out a little bit of the legal First Amendment and Administrative Procedures Act. I think that if you look, and we have the benefit now of a year's worth of hindsight, if you look back, I really believe, take all of this chaos and try to line it up in some sort of linear fashion. This is an attempt by the administration to curtail the institutional autonomy of American higher education as a group and institutions in particular. And I think it is extremely dangerous, not just for the institutions, for the students they serve, and for the nation as a whole. Take the international student issue, for example. I just can't begin to describe the ways in which that's bad for America. First of all, we know that bringing international students to our campuses is probably our greatest deployment of soft power. We bring people into the U.S., we treat them well, they get a great education, and they're a part of our discussion. And then what happens? Well, they either stay here and they help build our economy, bringing their incredible talents to bear on our work. Think about the great number of startups that are created in Silicon Valley and by people who began their career as students. Second thing they do is they go back to their homes and they have a disproportionate representation in leadership. So you've got soft power, you've got economic power, you've got security that's coming from friends across the table in negotiations.
So you think this is bad? I'm sorry to interrupt you, Ted, but you think this is bad diplomacy, bad economics?
It's bad.
Yeah.
It makes no sense at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about the core argument. I mean, one of the things that has been interesting to me is why the Trump administration is just so jazzed about higher education. As somebody who's covered this space for like 20 years and tried to explain to people at cocktail parties what I do, it's like, oh my God, he's writing about colleges. Now it's all anybody's talking about. And I think part of it is because there is a core idea emanating from the Trump administration. And it's that higher ed, through decades of hiring and even one-sided scholarship, is now actively hostile toward anyone who is pro-Israel, toward anyone who is conservative, anyone who is skeptical of transgender athletes competing in women's sports. Do you think there's any merit to that criticism?
I do. And I think we need to separate the identification of problems and their solutions. And I think here we did a session for college presidents at NYU 4 years ago on the growing danger of anti-Semitism on campus. So this is not something that the Trump administration or the Biden administration invented. I mean, anti-Semitism is probably the oldest form of hatred that exists in organized society, but we have seen it grow and we need to work on it. There's a lot to be said for the ideological hegemony in a number of departments, also a number of fields. The humanities in particular, I think, have been subject to a left-leaning evolution over time. I don't think that that's true in chemical engineering. And so, I think the administration is being fairly selective. But ideological diversity is critically important for us to build and maintain on campus. A culture that is supportive of all religions and all cultures is important for us to build on campus. No disagreement there. But imposing fines that have no basis in law or fact on institutions is just beyond the bounds. And I think it goes back to what you were saying about norms. The norms around higher education is that there are basically 4 freedoms that we have enjoyed in America in higher education: the freedom to decide who to teach, the freedom to decide who teaches, freedom to decide what to teach, and the freedom to decide what research projects to do. In each of those, the Trump administration has tried to pull back and to insert itself and create mechanisms of control over each of those 4. And when ACE takes action, it's when we believe that one or more of those 4 freedoms is being violated.
What concerns you most about that kind of infringement?
The fear that the administration has instilled in leaders across the country that is leading them to preemptively take steps to change who they hire, change who they admit, change what they teach, and change what research topics that they do in order to stay safe.
I think that the conservative argument would be, Ted, we let you guys do this for 100 years, and this is where we ended up. And so now we've got to exercise a heavier hand here, because when you had all this autonomy, you ended up creating hyper-liberal institutions that also produce people who don't vote for us anymore, which, I think is part of this story. I think Republicans have looked at the fact that you're much more likely to vote Democrat if you go to college. I think that's still true even in this most recent election. So perhaps that's part of the motive here. I guess I'm just curious what you think about that. Did higher ed have a chance to do something more meaningful without its feet to the fire? Or do you not buy that?
It's a really great point, Jack, and I really don't disagree. I think that there has been an evolutionary trend, and it's been evolutionary. And how do you change an evolutionary trend? I don't think you re-evolve it backwards. I think you have to take more dramatic action.
And that evolutionary trend is toward a more leftward tilt among institutions.
Yeah.
Okay. So you buy into that. You do not think this is a manufactured controversy.
I do not think it's a manufactured controversy. I do not. And I also believe that conservative students feel uncomfortable expressing their views on campuses. And I think that that's proof of the problem that we have.
So don't take this personally, Ted, but I'm going to make it personal.
Go for it.
So let's talk a little bit about you. I mean, you're a former Barack Obama political appointee. You spent loads of time in California as vice chancellor and dean of UCLA. You earned your degrees from Stanford. Some conservatives might look at this resume and say, Ted is the exact type of left coast liberal that we're talking about, and he's in charge of this highly influential higher ed association. Case closed.
Exactly. Okay, well, thanks, Jack. It's been fun. I've enjoyed our time together.
We were such good friends until just then.
Till just now. Point taken. And I'm not going to defend I'll defend my own record a little bit.
Can you be seen as an honest broker in this conversation, given your background?
I would hope so. And I have not had any trouble connecting with people over the course of my career from both left and right. When I was nominated to be undersecretary, the only organized opposition to my appointment was the American Federation of Teachers. And that's because I am a dyed-in-the-wool charter school supporter.
Okay.
And spent 8 years of my life giving other people's money to start charter schools around the country.
Let's talk in more detail. You've been very well behaved, Ted. You have not gotten deep into the weeds. You only made one reference to something I didn't fully understand. But let's go ahead. Let's dive in. So
Okay.
we should talk in more detail about how we got here. So in early 2025, the Trump administration says we're going to dramatically cut research funding at research universities across the country, and we're going to specifically look at the money that goes toward things like lab supplies and electricity. And in your world, people refer to this as indirect cost or facilities and administrative money, but it's just a fancy sort of wonky name for all of the stuff that's not directly related to that study. If you're running a university and you have researchers doing all types of work, then you got to keep the lights on. You got to do this type of thing. And there's money the federal government gives and negotiates rates for doing that. The Trump administration came forward and said, you know what, we're just going to set a ceiling on that that's much lower than what some universities have received and deal with it. You're saying the government can't do that. Tell us a little bit more about why.
This is all procedural.
Okay.
At the end of the day, Congress has the ability to determine the way the government supports indirect costs. And so I think the conversation is now moved to Congress. You and I'll get to that in a minute. But I want to go back even further and say that, indirect cost process was not brought down from the mount on clay tablets. In fact, it's been through a number of different lifetimes. And so the lifetime that we lived in before was trying to solve a problem where universities were spending a lot of time trying to make the charges direct charges. So Jack and Ted have a research lab. In the old days, the university would try to figure out how much rent to charge us, and we would put that into the grant as a direct cost. Mm-hmm. That ended up costing universities arms and legs of money, and it ended up causing federal auditors, just lifetime employment for them to go through all of these things.
Right.
So the solution was, let's go to each institution, we'll do a study, we'll take a look at the averages across the board, and we'll establish a rate for each institution. So nobody has to bargain about each grant. Mm-hmm. So it was a simplifying rule.
Does it follow that if you're a super wealthy university, that your indirect cost rate might be higher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say super wealthy. I would say research intensive.
Right. But optically, politically, it looks like we're giving boatloads of money to Princeton, or, maybe that's not a great example, but.
No, that's Princeton, Harvard, Stanford, MIT, Caltech.
But from a populist standpoint, this is a very resonant
argument. Why do they need the money?
Yes.
Right. They need the money because that's what it costs. There's no accusation that this isn't real money. I think that there's been an accusation that there's been some fraud, and they're likely fraud. Not widespread fraud, but I think that there are always issues that need to be cleaned up. Mm-hmm. But the indirect cost rate is based in part on the kind of research that's done.
Right.
And so the wealthy institutions that you're talking about use a lot of that wealth to do their own underwriting of subatomic particle research, for example. Giant biomedical laboratories.
Highly sophisticated equipment.
And so it would be wrong to think that the federal government is paying for all of that. In fact, they're not. So even the indirect costs don't pay everything. And the university chips in, a bunch, more than, I don't have the exact number, but I know that the folks who've been working on proposals say that the indirects that universities pay are at least equal to the indirects that are coming from the government.
And to some degree, this fight over indirect costs continues. These are still playing out in court, although you've had some favorable preliminary rulings. And I got to ask you, Ted, we were about to talk, and this was a couple weeks ago. I was preparing for this. I'm like, is this over? Because at one point, we were talking about caps on NIH awards to the tune of $5 billion, $5.2 billion, right. I think was one estimate. But now the president has signed bills into law that will prevent these agencies from capping the research money. Like I said, you're doing well in court on this. Trump hasn't issued a press release and said, I've seen the error of my ways and I'm giving all the money back. But is that effectively what is happening?
We're on a path to long-term resolution that will be halfway between where we were and where the president wants to be.
So does this mean that universities that had lost money have effectively been made whole now?
Slowly but surely, bit by bit, piece by piece, yes.
And yet I'm still hearing institutions that I consider to be quite well off saying we're going to have to start laying people off. We're going to have to start cutting budgets. Have universities overreacted to this, or is this just the way the timing works?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think that each institution will have its own story. But I think the indirect cost recovery was only one of the assaults on research and only one of the assaults on the university's payroll. Let's think about all of the individual grants that have been cut.
Over things like DEI, right?
Yeah, those are very meaningful cuts, and they're not limited to any one department. They're engineering programs that we're looking at mobility issues for handicapped folks, environmental science looking at the differential impact of wildfire smoke on different populations. Those grants are being cut or frozen with no real prospect of them being reinvigorated, and so the cuts are coming, and they're real. The other thing, let's not forget that there's a lot of pressure on international students, and for some institutions, international students have a pretty significant impact on the pocketbook.
At various times, Trump has talked about wanting to set a cap on the percentage of international students on a given campus. Right?
Yeah, and even though those have not materialized in just that way, they've certainly had a chilling effect on the flow of international students who look at the U.S. as an unreliable host for them now.
Stick around. We'll be back in a minute. If you're trying to keep up with new academic books, you already know the problem. There's more coming out than anyone can possibly read. That's why New Books Network is the best resource for scholars and deep readers to keep up with new research and writing in their field. New Books Network is a massive collection of long-form interviews with scholars and authors, almost 30,000 conversations on the site across history, politics, literature, science, you name it. You'll hear directly from the authors who lay out their arguments and research methods. New Books Network also works closely with academic publishers, including partnerships with Princeton University Press, Oxford University Press, and MIT Press. So it's a great way to stay current with the kinds of books that shape actual conversations in higher ed. If you want a smart, efficient way to discover books worth taking seriously, go to newbooksnetwork.com. That's newbooksnetwork.com. You started this conversation by saying you felt like we're still in a posture where higher education is under attack. The situation you describe is better, but still seems complicated and even dire for some particular institutions and researchers. Yeah. On the other hand, a lot of college leaders do seem kind of reluctant to talk publicly about this. Some of them might be in red states and they're worried about their lawmakers or their alumni. What are college leaders telling you privately that they might not want to say into a microphone?
Two things, and you and I covered both of them. One is a realization that we have hidden some of our underperformance under a rug, and they're actually pleased that we can now name it.
Underperformance in what area?
Well, graduation rates.
Okay.
Graduation rates for four-year institutions have been stuck at about 60% for 25 years. That might not be bad if people just kind of moved on. But what's happened over that period is two things. One, the wage premium for a bachelor's degree has become increasingly significant. So if you leave without your bachelor's degree, you've taken 2 years out of your employability, let's say, and you don't have the benefit of the degree. And second, and more importantly, is that a broader swath of people are borrowing money to go to college. And so they leave with no degree and some debt.
Ted, I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you saying that college leaders who might be reluctant to condemn the Trump administration for its overall posture are staying quiet in part because they agree that graduation rates are a problem? Because I don't feel like that's what the ideological fight is in this country.
Well, I was just using that as, that was my run-up.
Oh,
that was the easy one.
All right, okay.
You know, most presidents that I talk to acknowledge the lack of ideological diversity on their campuses.
But you said, and you were quoted in this quite buzzy summer piece from The Atlantic that was titled something like "The College Presidents Who Hate Each Other." You remember this old chestnut,
I remember
Ted?
that one. Yeah.
And this was about whether the presidents of Washington University in St. Louis. I wish people could see your face right now, Ted. You look like you just ate a lemon.
Yeah, exactly.
This is whether the presidents of Washington University, St. Louis, and Vanderbilt, who have been more open to some of the criticisms of the Trump administration, are being opportunistic in this moment. In other words, that there's a little bit of a branding going on or a currying favor with this administration among institutions that you, Ted, said are part of the, what did you say? The mealy middle of higher education among some of these big associations. I bet you got some phone calls about this.
I did.
What motivated you to say that? You alluded to associations feeling this way, Ivy League colleges feeling this way. Does Ted Mitchell feel this way? Are Vandy and Wash U cozying up to the Trump administration for some opportunistic reason?
You want a yes or no answer, I know. Look, I think that they are benefiting from their embracing of public embracing of some of Trump's issues. I think the point that I was making about the muddy middle or whatever I called is that, I mean, this is like any administration. This is an opportunity to align yourself with power in a way that you think will benefit your institution. And I might sound like I'm critical of that. I'm not. I think that it makes perfect sense for institutions to do what they need to do. Where I get rubbed the wrong way is when institutions say everybody should do that. And, what I've noted is that, presidents they're concerned about the lack of ideological diversity in some of their departments and some of their faculties. And they know that that is not an easy problem to fix because the faculty are the ones who vote on hiring. They vote on promotion and tenure. And there is a natural, and not conspiratorial, but there's a natural sense to believe that work that looks like your work is better than work that looks like somebody you don't respect.
Mm-hmm.
And so changing the culture of faculties is a long-term project.
Right.
So what we've seen, and I really admire this, what we've seen is institutions creating new places, centers, institutes, whatever, in which they put their money into a focus on kind of righting the ship, whether that's bringing in more conservative fellows, whether it's creating places for civic dialogue. I give Vandy great kudos because they're in the middle now of a set of, I think, 100 different talks that they're supporting on campus.
And they seem to be opening a new campus every week.
They are. They're taking my old homestead over, I think.
Right.
So.
Are you allowed to go to any of these Vandy campuses, Ted, or are you dead to that institution?
No, I'm not dead. Daniel, that's a good question.
You can't go to the South Florida campus and catch some rays?
Yeah, Daniel and I talk. I'm holding out for an invitation to the Champaign kickoff of the California campus.
All right. Well, let's talk about your job herding cats, Ted, because part of what you're doing is you're trying to get all these varied people, whether it's Vandy's president or other associations, to kind of speak with one voice during a moment when a lot of people feel like higher education is in some sort of existential battle for its autonomy. And I think that the clearest example of this had to do with the Trump administration releasing this compact for academic excellence in higher education. This was the Trump wish list of all the things they wanted from colleges and universities about banning scholarships tied to race and doing away with departments that are seen as hostile to conservatives. And if you signed on to this, the prize was that you were going to win some favor in future funding awards from the federal government. Nobody seemed to really respond to this or like this, but you spoke out against the compact personally. ACE issued a statement about this, and we'll link to it in the show notes here. But if you go and look at it, you're the only one of the so-called Big Six associations that signed on to this. I'm sure you asked your colleagues at other associations to back you in this. Why didn't they?
You'll have to ask them. I mean, I think.
Well, didn't you ask them and they told you an answer?
Yeah, I did. And, I think you hit on it. I think that all of us association leaders who are national in our scope recognize that our red state presidents may be in some difficulty, not just because of the pressure to conform to the Trump administration's desires, but because their own state legislatures are taking action that, like the Trump administration, is kind of crossing the line on those four basic principles. So keeping red state members protected is a high priority.
And does that mean speaking when they can't speak? Is that what you mean?
That's the position that ACE has taken.
And does that imply that you are hearing from college presidents in red states saying, Ted, help me out here? I can't say this, but you can?
I am. And I'm also hearing, stay out of our laundry, because if you nationalize this issue, it's only going to hurt me.
Unpack that for me. What do you mean, stay out of our laundry?
If ACE were to make a statement, for example, just to pick Texas, where there's a lot of legislation every week about higher education, if ACE were to come out in support or opposed to state legislation in Texas, that would create a whole new front. And it would say, see, those lefties in Washington, they're all aligned, and we have to be even more strident.
Well, let me ask a question of greater historical sweep then, Ted. Do you think 20 years from now, we're going to be asking some of these college presidents, Daddy, where were you during the Great War? That people are failing to meet the moment and stick their necks out and talk about existential threats to autonomy, and that they're going to live to regret that? Is this a moment of appeasement?
This is the conversation that's about 10 feet below the waves.
Uh-huh.
I think that there will be some reckoning for some presidents, but I believe that all presidents are doing what they believe to be the right thing for their institutions. And so I don't think that anybody's not going to be able to sleep at night.
But is it possible you survive the next 3 years and you squander the next 20?
Could be, yeah. Yeah. And I think that those are the institutions that will, I don't think that they will look back and say, gosh, I wish I ran to the ramparts and went to every protest and issued a statement every week on how bad I thought this stuff was. I think the institutions that will regret are the institutions that are not making the changes that need to be made in order, and we haven't talked about public confidence yet, in order really to restore public confidence in higher education.
Well, I want to talk about public confidence, and that's in fact where I wanted to close. And we can stay on this theme of time and history, because I was curious to ask you, I'm going to give you a time machine, Ted.
Ready.
And if you could go back to any period and change something about how higher ed was positioning itself or conducting itself so that it could avoid this tragic loss of confidence that it's experiencing now, where would you go and what would you do?
I would go back to I'm tempted to say I'd go back to the Moral Act, but you and I can do that offline. The creation of the land-grant colleges and universities. Fine.
I'm totally putting you on the spot here, but sure, let's go to the land-grant Act.
And I have a more entertaining answer.
Okay.
But look, the land-grant colleges and universities were created to serve working men and women by producing knowledge that would be useful to them in their occupations.
We're talking 1860s.
We're talking 1860s. We're talking the middle of the Civil War. Justin Morrill of Stratford, Vermont.
Okay. I'm picturing you dressed in period attire. You're there.
Thank you. I love it.
Okay.
I love it. And so this was designed to move away from the elitist colonial colleges that we now know as the Ivy League and to create institutions of meaning for day-to-day Americans. It was decidedly technical. It doesn't mean that it was all vocational, but it meant that you would connect Plato with research on agronomy. And I think that really was a moment where we had a chance to create an American higher education system that was both utilitarian and academic. And we slid off of that model rather quickly as the big land-grant institutions decided they wanted to look like and be like the Harvards of the world. I'd go back there and I would give the land grants a little bit more muscle around their original missions. But in more recent times, I would go back to the confluence of Black Lives Matter that came right on the heels of trying to figure out how to deal with conservative speakers on campus. And I think that that's where the DEI movement came about. And I think that we lost sight of really using those words, diversity, equity, and inclusion, to mean all people. And so we had cancel culture on the left, not allowing conservative speakers to speak. And we had cancel culture on the right that came about in the backlash against DEI. And so we never really had the honest conversation about what a campus would look like that supported everyone's identity, gave everyone a voice, but created some rules of the road around that. The result, I think, is that DEI became very exclusive. And going back to that seminar that we had about anti-Semitism, the most damning part of that meeting was Jewish students saying that they were not welcome in the DEI conversations on their campuses. For me, that sort of said it all, is that we had created a different kind of exclusiveness, and we were going to have to struggle our way through it. The Gaza protests of that spring, I think, were demonstrations of the fact that we had never gotten our hands around these issues that came up around having civil conversations about very difficult topics on our campus. We kind of just said, we assumed that students would be able to manage that on their own. They needed our help, and we didn't have it available to them.
Yeah. Both interesting, pivotal points in history. We haven't really talked about this, and I think it's a good place to close, Ted, which is the historic relationship between the federal government and universities in this country. There's always been tensions. There's always lawmakers that want different things. Presidents have different priorities. But the level of acrimony between the Trump administration and the nation's colleges is unlike anything I've ever seen. Even if this is resolved by courts in a way that's satisfactory to you and people in your positions, I have to wonder whether this fundamental relationship has been irrevocably changed. And I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, it's the right question, Jack. And I'm a little older than you are, and so even in my time, it's never been this bad. The closest it's been in my experience was at the state level when Ronald Reagan was governor and the University of California was on fire. But there it was about the immediacy of the events. It wasn't about the plumbing. And I think that that's what's really different about this, is that the challenge is less like the spring protests and more about what should the role be in funding research? Who should make a determination about what research questions are asked? And that, I think, gets down way deep into the relationship. And the relationship has been, I think, pretty easy on universities. And I expect at the end of this, there will be some more robust guardrails. And I think that our job is to make sure that those guardrails are all about integrity, transparency, and not about ideological preference over what questions are asked or who sits in decision-making chairs.
All right. Well, Ted, we'll continue to watch that and see if that's what happens. Good luck to you, and thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Jack, thanks a lot. Always a pleasure. Take care of yourself.
College Matters from the Chronicle is a production of the Chronicle of Higher Education, the nation's leading independent newsroom covering colleges. If you like the show, please leave us a review or invite a friend to listen. And remember to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast so that you never miss an episode. You can find an archive of every episode, all of our show notes, and much more at chronicle.com/College Matters. If you'd like, drop us a note at collegematters@chronicle.com. We are produced by Rococo Punch. Our Chronicle producer is Fernanda Zamudio Suarez. Our podcast artwork is by Cottrell Thomas. Special thanks to our colleagues Brock Reed, Sarah Brown, Carmen Mendoza, Ron Coddington, Joshua Hatch, and all of the people at the Chronicle who make this show possible. I'm Jack Stripling. Thanks for listening.